The Denver Broncos end their preseason undefeated, but their biggest strength might be their biggest concern going into the regular season. We'll share our thoughts on that and more here on today's Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Denver Broncos end the preseason undefeated. Broncos Country. Now the regular season is fast upon us here. Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more, make sure you become an everyday. If you're not one already, hit that subscribe or that follow button wherever you get your podcast. And a special thank you to everyone for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And today we're going to go through, obviously, the Broncos' final preseason game where they ended it on a high note, winning against the New Orleans Saints. We'll go through where the Broncos' starting offensive line has a couple of trends that are growing a little concerning. And now you have to wait till the regular season to see if those things get fixed. We'll also talk about Lucas Krull, Audric Estime, those players' big days, and maybe even some players who are on the roster bubble who made a case for themselves, whether it be for the Broncos, another team, or as practice squad candidates. We'll recap all the action on today's episode of the show. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert of their predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, look, it's always nice to end the preseason, on a winning note, undefeated, but at the end of the day, preseason wins don't matter, though Sean Payton has acknowledged and has said, we want to win at everything that we do. And I love the mentality. I love the mindset here. We got a chance here. Saturday's preseason finale. The main theme was, what do the Broncos starters look like offensively? As we got to see Bo Nix and that starting offensive line and the starting group of guys there, minus a couple of names here and there, get a chance to get on the field one last time before the regular season.
Yeah, it didn't start off too great for those guys, right? Obviously, and especially in the running game, where the first unit in 3 series, Cody, 5 carries for 4 yards. It's not what we want to see from the starting offense in terms of that running game. Once again, we did not see J.K. Dobbins out there. I know that he's probably obviously just being kind of put on ice. Like, he's one of those guys that Sean Payton talked about. They'll watch, like, I guess he didn't want to say load management, but we'll say load management. You don't want to necessarily put a guy out there who's got a lengthy history of injuries in the preseason and risk not having him when you get to the regular season. So RJ Harvey was out there, though, for the Denver Broncos in this game. And unfortunately, what did we see? 3 carries for 4 yards. And that wasn't all on the offensive line. But, I mean, shoot, Cody, we want to see better from that particular unit when it comes to running the football. And I think that's kind of the source of maybe some concern right now, is the performance of the offensive line, which was said to be, number 1 in run block win rate, number 1 in pass block win rate, supposed to be the best O-line in the game, right? Where have these guys been here in the preseason?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question, because all the reports and all the conversations in the national media have been that this is the biggest strength of the Broncos is their offensive line. And so far, and we understand, they're transitioning to a new run blocking scheme. It's still very much, we're implementing the outside wide zone, but your zone blocking principles that you had from last year are still prevalent, especially when you have to run some inside zone stuff, which the Broncos and Sean Payton have said it really depends on the type of front that they're facing. Granted, they didn't come into this week game planning against what type of defense New Orleans was going to run. But it is, I agree with you, a concern to see them not get those springy runs necessarily that you want to see from a unit that's supposed to have an improved offensive line in terms of production and improved run game. That stat line, 5 rushing attempts for 4 yards, is very reminiscent of what we saw when Javonte was a Bronco last year. For me, this is our raw reaction following the game. And of course, we're going to wait for the All-22 film to come out. I'll have a film breakdown over at Mile High Sports on that. That'll kind of tell us a little bit more here. But it did seem like when the Broncos were trying to run the football to the outside, Sayre, it seemed like backside penetration got inside. And so when you're trying to make that cutback, there's nothing there. You try to get to the outside and everything gets clogged up a little bit. You have a holding penalty on Adam Troutman that backs you up to a 2nd and 20. So for me, it just was not ideal circumstances for the Broncos trying to run the game, the ball in this game here too. But also, I will say, just on my official first watch of the game, definitely feel like there was some concern here, not for Bo Nix, but I talk about pass protection. It seemed like there was a little too much pressure inside, and a couple of times where the pocket was bowed around Bo at that point, where he made an impressive play, kind of falling forward, side-arming it to Sayre Bedinger for a big-time catch and run on 3rd down. I was a little concerned about the offensive line pass protection there? Because it didn't seem like you had a lot of time to throw within a clean pocket, or you didn't have a clean enough pocket there if you are Bo Nix.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like those guys are on point yet. And I know that it's the preseason, and I know that, man, everybody wants to diminish that one way or the other, or they want to prop it up one way. I mean, it's so funny, Cody. If we say something good about the preseason, it's just preseason. If we say something bad, it's like, chill out, it's just preseason, So interesting either way. But yeah, I think the offensive line performance has left something to be desired. And certainly when you're seeing Bo Nix get hit after he throws a pass, like, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that in a preseason game. I know that quarterbacks are going to get hit, but man, this is a unit that I don't know if it's the change in the philosophy or what it's, what it is. What's the source of it? Are they overthinking things out there? Are they just getting beat? Because I know the Saints have some good players on the defensive line. There's no question about it. Like, that's one of the reasons why, I've talked with our good friend Ross Jackson and been like, I don't think the Saints are going to be as bad as people say. They've got some players on that defensive line, and that's going to help you in a lot of games. But shoot, I mean, even if their defensive line has some good pieces, you expect your O-line to perform better than it did, especially when you're out there trying to execute maybe some of your more basic stuff. So to me, I think the offensive line left plenty to be desired. And thankfully, Bo Nix was able to overcome that by showing what he does best. He makes plays, Cody. I think to kind of flip this conversation is that Bo Nix, he really does look like he has that command of the offense that you and many others have talked about. Like, he went out there after the slow start for the offense, and he just took the bull by the horns and started making plays. I think really kind of starting with that pass to Sayre Bedinger that you just mentioned.
Yeah, there was that. I thought the back shoulder on 4th down to Courtland Sutton was a nice play. And then, I mean, Bo had a beautiful dot on a bootleg rollout to his left where it just perfectly placed throw for, what was it, a 43-yard gain or something like that to Courtland Sutton down the field. And then obviously you cap it off with a very impressive final third series where Bo went 4 of 4 for 71 yards and 1 touchdown there, throwing against the blitz, right? Because they had a nickel defender, or it was the outside linebacker was kind of walked up and a little bit wide. But then they either brought the safety or the nickel guy and they blitzed him, and Bo saw that it was coming here. He kind of threw it off of his back foot a little off platform. You don't want that to become too much of a habit, but Bo has also shown he can make those throws. You find Courtland Sutton in the perfect spot there for a little bit of a touchdown. The offense was able to finish on a strong note here. But, if you had to go on a scale of 1 to 10 right now, and granted, look, this is another opportunity for them to get tape on this game. You can look at what the Saints were doing defensively. I'm sure that the Tennessee Titans are going to obviously bring their scheme, but they may look to see what some of these teams have done or how they've aligned at Denver to stop the run or to make things hard on Bo Nix in 2 preseason games that we've seen so far. They may try to throw some wrinkles in there. They got Devondre Sweat, who's a big dog on the inside of that D-line, and obviously Jeffrey Simmons. That's going to be a tough task. And so this Broncos offensive line, you got a couple of weeks, but you have to shore up some of these issues. Where are you at right now in terms of concern with the O-line on a scale of 1 to 10? I'm at about maybe like a 6.5 right now because I've been at practice. I've seen the offensive line do well against Denver's. I've expected more from them here in the preseason.
Yeah, I would say about a 5 or so. I want to see them go with extended snaps because that's the other thing is like, going into a game, you're playing, a dozen or so snaps or whatever they ended up playing in the teens, something like that. You know that you're not playing a full game. I think over the course of a full game, and we want to see these guys start hot because that was a problem last year for the Broncos offense was starting slow. So they need to start better and they need to figure that out. But I think over the course of a game, when you're playing 50 plus snaps or whatever, 60 something snaps, you're going to get a chance to really sort of get into a groove, so to speak, as opposed to, hey, this was our first handful of plays. We're not even running like a script, or I don't know what they're doing out there. So I don't know if it's necessarily scripted or what they're trying to do, but I do feel like it could be the different circumstance is going to dictate maybe a different mindset and mentality towards those guys' approach. And so right now, maybe they're trying to work some things out or whatever it may be, but less thinking, more playing. I think that's what we need to see from everyone that's kind of maybe been overthinking things on this team when the starters are on the field.
Yeah, and that's the mystery of the preseason. You never know because I can tell you this, when you're going into a preseason matchup, you're not looking at 49ers, Cardinals, or Saints film and saying, all right, they're going to run this against us. We're going to game plan to do this because when they come out in this look, we're going to just kill it and we're going to run this. everything is base foundational right now. They're keeping a lot of the stuff they're going to run the regular season kind of in that back pocket there. But now the effort, once you focus on Tennessee, Sayre, is going to be more concerted on this is the front that the Tennessee Titans defense runs. This is what we're going to do to try to counteract that in some of their better players. So now you get like a week and a half, 2 weeks of game planning here before it has to carry over into week one, where everything the Broncos do going forward, it matters. And the stakes are high every single week here. Broncos country, we still got a lot to talk about here. Follow the Broncos' undefeated preseason campaign here. In Saturday's win against the Saints here, Lucas Krull and a couple of other players made a case for the 53-man roster. We'll highlight whether or not they did enough here on today's episode of the show.
This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff, it's almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. And myself, Cody Roark, we are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league.
Well, to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL.
Lucas Krull and a handful of other players made their case for the 53-man roster, but was it enough? That's what we're going to discuss up next on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, as we prepare for the frenzy that is roster cuts, getting down from 90 or 91 players in the Broncos case down to 53. We'll see if there's any trades, any, surprise cuts, things like that. But these guys had one last shot to get the job done. And Cody, I'm excited to talk about it, but I just want to say quickly thank you to all the listeners for making Locked On Broncos their first listen of the day every single day. If you haven't done so already, get us at the top of your feed where you listen to podcasts. Hit subscribe on YouTube as well. You don't want to miss a single episode, especially as we get here towards roster cuts where we'll be reacting to every single move. So who's going to be part of those roster cuts, though, Cody? That's what we're all wondering now after the preseason has finally reached its conclusion. Lucas Krull is one of those players who I would say is very firmly on the roster bubble. And with the injury to Nate Adkins, maybe that pushes him a little bit more towards the 53. But I would say over the last couple of weeks, it's been more so his on-field performance rather than any injuries to other players that's making his case the strongest.
Yeah, whether we're talking about practice or preseason, Krull has had a quietly impressive offseason after really kind of having a slow start to mandatory minicamp, OTAs. We didn't hear his name being talked about as much this year as we did last year around that time of OTAs and minicamp and the Sean Payton press conferences about best players. We heard all that stuff here. But I like the offseason that Lucas has had, and really he's been stringing together consistent practices as a pass catcher, has been a reliable target, attacking vertically and over the middle of the field for Bo Nix. In practice, we've seen that consistently here. I feel like for me, when you look at the numbers game too, I feel like you have to carry 3 tight ends on your active roster at least at this position. And that's not even factoring in your hybrid fullback tight end, Nate Adkins, who we know is going to be a roster lock here on the 53. So you're going to have 4 guys at this position. And I think out of everybody in that room right now, I feel like Krull has made the strongest case for himself, whereas guys like Caden Prieskorn, who had an impressive couple of stretches of preseason games, didn't do anything in the preseason finale against the Saints here, will be the perfect practice squad candidate. Caleb Lohner, some raw talent that still needs to be worked on a little bit. I think will end up on the practice squad here for Sean Payton. But Krull, I felt like did enough. That catch he had on that 2-minute drill right up the seam, that's a fantastic play. Those are the types of plays you've wanted to see a guy like Krull make since he came onto the roster initially just a couple years ago. Ironically enough, after the Saints wrapped up their preseason, their third and final game, the Broncos, they snagged Krull on the waiver wire and they brought him to Denver. So your thoughts on the case that he made here, because I think you need that security blanket option here. And, in the event something happens to Troutman, or maybe Krull can do something a little more for you. Evan Ingram, he did have a drop in this game as well. And he has had a couple of drops in some practices. I'm not worried about that just yet, but I think that the tight end position, you need as many bodies as you can here.
Yeah, you need guys with that dynamic skill set as well if you can get them. And Lucas Krull has that, right? He has the ability to go up and make plays. I mean, we saw more so in 2023 when he was taking advantage of some shots downfield where he was making those plays. That kind of inspired maybe the confidence to give him an increased role last year, where we did see him lead the group in catches, but it was only 19, right? So nobody who led the Broncos really tight end position in any category last year is going to be writing home about those stats anytime soon. But Lucas, I think, like you said, he picked things up as the offseason progressed, as the preseason progressed. He showed things that really no other tight end has shown in the preseason. I mean, after the catch stuff, going up and high pointing the ball, making plays in the red zone, like he cashed in on the opportunities that he was given. And so I just think, especially with Nate Adkins dealing with the tightrope surgery, you've got to keep Lucas Krull. Caleb Lohner was, we'll talk about him more so going down the line, but you mentioned Caden Prescorn as well. I just think Lucas Krull outplayed both of those guys big time this offseason.
Yeah, and he'll play quite a bit of special teams. He did last year for the Broncos, and I imagine that role is probably going to stay the same for him as the team gets ready to make roster cuts on Tuesday. We know that tough decision is always going to be something to look at. Roster cuts will be around 2 p.m. Mountain Time, 4 o'clock Eastern Time on Tuesday. That's the deadline there, and we have complete coverage over here, Locked On Broncos. I felt like really kind of the opening jump here in the first quarter, I felt like Sayre Bedinger kind of showcased why he's going to win a 53-man spot on this roster here. And it isn't necessarily because of like what he did in the rushing game. He had some nice, solid, small runs here and there, but it was what he did on third down. I mean, proven working with that first team offense. What was his theme here? It was the third down back, essentially, in this game against the Saints. He catches that pass and has a nice 17-yard catch and run. Great reliability, great hands right there out of the backfield. But also, it's the special teams aspect there where he can help you, Sayre, in 4 different ways, right? Pass catching, pass protection, rushing, and he can also help you in the kick return game. He had a 47-yard kick return to get the Broncos the ball near midfield. That's anytime you can do that, it just kind of helps solidify. And it kind of goes with the stance where I'm like, all right, it's going to be Sayre Bedinger next to Marvin Mims. And when teams try to kick away from Marvin, I like what Bedinger can do in the return game.
100%. I mean, he showed he's got that juice in the return game. You mentioned the play to Bo Nix where he caught a pass and ran upfield for a bunch of yards. And then also 2 pass protection reps in a row, Cody, where the Broncos asked him to protect for Sam Ehlinger in this game. Like, I mean, he not only just threw his body in there, but he made some really good plays in terms of pass protection. So that blitz pickup or just being able to slide and read where that free defender is coming from. Like, we saw that in this game, and it confirmed what Sean Payton has already said, which is that he's one of their more trustworthy backs in pass protection, which we did not see much of that from RJ Harvey in the preseason. Didn't see a lot of that from Blake Watson that I can recall. And obviously J.K. Dobbins can do it, but he hasn't really played much. And so Badie is the guy who's really shown that he can pass protect. And so I think he's not only a lock for the 53, I think he's won that third running back spot, and we might see him on the field more than people are expecting because he's trustworthy right now. He's proven when you give him those opportunities, he's going to take advantage of them. So I don't know. Is he going to get more action than we thought? I just think I've been really impressed with what we've seen from him in the preseason.
I feel like we will see quite a bit of him in the regular season if things stick. He does make the 53. I would be shocked if he doesn't. I'll be very honest with you. I'll be shocked based on everything that we've seen this offseason. He has worked his way up because initially the primary touches were going to RJ Harvey and it was going to Jaleel. And then you would see kind of him getting those reps, kind of in front of Blake Watson. There was a time where Blake Watson was getting reps in front of him, but then that really started to change. And that's where I think the dog days of training camp, the long, grueling practices, you can have a couple of good days here and there, but can you stack consistency? That's where Sayre Bedinger, I felt like, has emerged at this position more so than anybody else. He's been that consistent guy. He was mad last year. He didn't make the 53-man roster. He felt like he should have, and I agree. He had a great argument, but ultimately it was the numbers game that really impacted that. And, of course, they wanted to protect one of their younger guys in Watson. And there was just a lot of different things going on with the Broncos last year. But now they have some tough decisions to make here once again as the roster deadline is approaching us very, very quickly here. And one of the players who had one of the more standout performances in Saturday's preseason win might have just auditioned himself to be traded to another team. Or could he somehow end up on the Broncos due to an injury that we saw in Saturday's preseason game? We'll talk about Audric Estime and his roster outlook here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
This episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything. Cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes, but do you know what actually works for you? I mean, with so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. And that's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You'll get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something that you saw on social media.
Well, life doesn't come with a playbook or a manual that navigates us through how to deal with some of the toughest things that life tends to throw our ways. But you can connect with yourself and understand yourself a little bit more and find the resources necessary to help improve your day-to-day and your mindset. I've used BetterHelp therapy before in the past. I found it to be very beneficial for me, and I think it could benefit you too as well. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Audric Estime put together his strongest performance of the offseason and the preseason and might have played himself into a roster spot somewhere else. Or could there be a chance he still stays in the Mile High City? We'll debate and discuss some of the players that were on the roster bubble coming into Saturday's game and what they did here on today's episode of the show. Sayre, let's kick things off here with Audric Estime. Obviously, the Broncos, they've shown that they're not afraid to make trades if they get good value. Obviously, he was sending Devon Bailey to New Orleans early on in the week here. Audric Estime, because of the Broncos' overall running back depth right now with J.K. Dobbins, R.J. Harvey, and the guy we talked about in Tyler Badie. And it seems like Jaleel McLaughlin's got a spot on the 53 based on what Sean Payton said post-game. We'll get to that in a minute. Audric Estime put forth his best overall performance, over 40 yards rushing on 8 carries, 5 yards per carry average for him, a rushing touchdown. And also, I thought he did a really good job when he got a chance to catch a pass out of the backfield here. Quite arguably his strongest showcase yet, but Blake Watson left the game with a knee injury, did not return. In your opinion, does this change how the Broncos may or may not approach the Audric Estime situation? Where do you stand on this?
It doesn't really feel like it, does it? I mean, I know I have my personal preference, Cody, and I'll get into that. But I mean, Audric was the last back up the last couple of weeks. I know that he couldn't literally be the 6th back up this week because the Broncos didn't play all 6 guys, but he was the last guy last week against the Cardinals, and he was the last guy this week against the Saints. And like you said, he did play his best game yet. And to me, as we've been evaluating this whole picture, and we've been talking about it all offseason, and we've been discussing the possibilities, right? To me, Audric Estime offers you a variance at the position that you just lack if you don't have him on the roster, right? Not that you need 2 big backs, because there's no written rule anywhere that says, well, you got to have 2 big backs and you got to have 2 smaller backs, or you got to have 2 change of pace. Like, there's no written rules anywhere. But if J.K. Dobbins does get hurt at some point this season, and history tells us that there's a chance that could happen, like, Audric is the only guy that I think you would really trust between the tackles right now. I mean, that's obviously been a pronounced issue with R.J. Harvey that people have brought up a number of times. I even saw some people saying, oh, wow, he actually ran between the tackles on that touchdown run that he had against the Cardinals. I mean, that's something that he's obviously got to work on or do better, or whatever the case, not to mention the O-line struggling, in that way. But then also Jaleel McLaughlin is a smaller, what Sean Payton said, change of pace back, who is, I think he's had his 3rd back role kind of taken away by Tyler Badie. So you're talking about now adding a little bit of variance into this, and Audric can run between the tackles. He can create yards after contact. He had the really nice touchdown run against New Orleans. We saw it last year too, when against the Kansas City Chiefs. I just don't think he got a great opportunity this offseason with the better offensive lines than what he played with, Cody. And I'm not saying that it's a make or break thing in terms of like, I'm going to be mad if the Broncos cut him. Like, I get it. He was a 5th rounder last year. You've had a competition. You decided it went a certain way, but it just doesn't feel like he got the fairest shake overall.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's a valid claim to be made, and maybe that's by design, and maybe there is stuff going on behind the scenes that we simply don't know about. I also find it so weird. He's your youngest player on your roster, and specifically at running back there, and he's the last guy getting touches on 2 consecutive weeks of the preseason, though it felt like more today. There was a concerted effort to actually showcase him a little bit. I would love to see him get some run here with the first team offensive line, because to your point, the downhill running aspect was present when he was in the game here on Saturday. I felt like last week against the Cardinals, it definitely seemed like they were trying to run him outside a little bit more so than downhill. And nothing was there last week for him on a consistent basis. So what is it? The truth has got to be somewhere in the middle here. But obviously the Broncos, I mean, I think it's a testament to just where they're at from a roster standpoint now compared to where they were last year. And did Audric get the fairest shake? I think you can look at it objectively and say, no, he probably didn't. But for them to go out there and bring in 2 new running backs here this offseason, draft with a premium pick, it kind of puts the writing on the wall that it's just maybe Sean Payton doesn't have trust in Estime. And that may be for a reason we don't know. We may never end up knowing unless Estime goes elsewhere and does a tell-all. But I don't think that he's going to do that. He's a humble young man who, works hard. I'll say that about Estime. It was put out earlier in camp that, he's pouting. He's got a bad attitude. And I don't agree with that. I haven't seen that from Estime. I just see a guy who's he looks mad all the time, which isn't a bad thing because he runs like it too. And so the truth has to be somewhere in the middle. But we're obviously going to wait to hear what happens with Blake Watson. Left the game with a knee injury. We hope that he's okay. He was walking off the field gingerly. He was quickly ruled out. And I think the good sign was that the cart didn't come out, but that could be something that ends up bringing up some things where maybe he ends up on IR or something like that. I don't know, because we know Nate Adkins, of all people, is not going on IR and that he'll make the 53-man roster. So I imagine Drew Sanders could be one of those spots. And maybe at this point too, Blake Watson might be able to kind of sneak through a little bit on IR at this point. That might be a saving grace. And, hopefully he's not hurt or it's not a severe injury, but from a roster building standpoint, if you wanted to keep him on your practice squad, this is the perfect opportunity to kind of go through and activate his window whenever the time comes in the regular season. But it's a lot of speculation. We don't like to do that too much here. So we'll wait for the official report coming out here in the next couple of days here on Blake Watson. Anybody else catch your eye in this game? I feel like there were a couple of players who stood out. I mean, the player that I had selected to watch, Joaquin Davis, didn't seem like he got featured in any way, shape, or form in this game. I don't know if that was by design or whatnot, but the Broncos seemed to try to get Caleb Lohner involved a little bit here. Some athleticism that you could see from him, but once again, still very much raw at this point from what we saw in the preseason finale.
Yeah, 100%. I think Caleb Lohner kind of proved what we were asking a question about going into this game, is he more of a practice squad candidate, or is he somebody that you, for lack of a better term, burn a 53-man roster spot on and kind of just keep developing him and prevent other teams from taking him? I think now what we've seen, I don't know that the Broncos would be uncomfortable subjecting him to waivers. I think that that's certainly something that they would have to discuss internally because they did draft him. They did use the 7th round pick on it. It was just a 7th rounder, but we've seen those 7th round picks, those lottery tickets hit for the Denver Broncos in recent years. Obviously, I mean, Jonathan Cooper has been great. Devon Vele turned out to be something, and then you added future assets with him. So I'm not just saying the Broncos would just throw it away because, say, oh, well, he was just a 7th rounder. But yeah, he looks really raw out there, Cody. And obviously we saw that it kind of at a number of different junctures here in the preseason. I was really interested as well by the performance of, I think we got to shout him out, Kyrese Rowan. I mean, on that game sealing drive, he made some really nice plays there. And that guy's got some serious speed too. So I would be shocked if he wasn't a practice squad guy. I know his name has come up a number of times as well throughout training camp. So he's somebody that I think deserves to be highlighted, but I was kind of surprised as you. I know we got our first A.T. Perry sighting as well out there wearing number 87 for the Broncos against his former team. So he didn't make really any plays, but he was targeted, I think, one time, and we saw him out there on the field. So that was a nice thing to see as well.
Yeah. Hey, we got our first look at Q Robinson. The nice bend on a strip sack that he had against the Saints. I loved just kind of seeing his stab move. And look, Nick Bonito gave him a lot of praise early on this past week, said he's a bulldozer. We saw that because he kind of strong-armed the offensive tackle, pushed him back, but also brought his arm out, which pretty good extension for him there to knock the football away. Forces the strip sack. You love that. The depth, I think, is in a great spot. I mean, Q's spot is not in question. I also feel like Damari Mathis did pretty good, too, in what could have been a showcase for him in this final game. Saw some action in the passing game. Had a nice pass break up there, came up and run support, had a couple of passes covered there. Really, I think Denver's depth guys, they kind of closed it out there, though. I'd say for the offensive line, in this game in particular, from the starters, second string, third string, I didn't feel like it was the offensive line's best product that we've seen so far in the preseason. You saw Sam Ehlinger have to escape pressure quite a bit. He got hit a few times, took some pretty nice shots there. And what were your thoughts overall on these kind of final pieces here before we wrap up today's post-game show?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think despite all that, I think Sam played a good game. I was
Yeah.
really impressed by what he did. I was interested that Jarrett Stidham wasn't out there, though you and I have talked about the fact that he doesn't really need to do anything else, right? I mean, he obviously dominated in the games that he showed, and he's proven his value as QB2 of this team. But of course, anytime anybody is held out of a preseason game, especially those who are not starters, just like with Devon Bailey, we ask the question, like, why? Now, why would they do that? Right? You know, those sorts of things. So the tinfoil hats are always on when roster moves are about to be made, but very impressed with Sam and the game that he played, especially late, sealing the victory with that drive that he had. And guys made plays, Cody. That the Broncos flexed their depth big time this preseason.
Yeah, and it looks like that Stidham is going to be kind of a lock mainstay there. And Sean Payton said in his post-game presser, they saw what Stidham could do in the plan all along. Apparently, it was to play Sam right after Bo got on the field there. I think Sam he's a vested guy. He'll be brought back onto the practice squad here at this point. I think there'll be a handful of other guys. Adam Prentice will keep an eye on as a vested guy that will probably be brought back onto the practice squad. A few names as Denver's going to go through trying to formulate their 53-man roster. But Broncos Country, on Monday's episode of the show, Sayre and I, we're going to play GM. We're going to give you our final 53-man roster prediction. Who makes it on offense? Who makes it on defense? How many positions at running back, wide receiver, and other ones? We'll go through all that on Monday's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. We'll see you next time.